Echoing America, Blair says Britain is now at war. Tiger Woods forces a Ryder Cup postponement. And born 2 days after her father's death on one hijacked plane.
From ITN, the ITV News with Trevor Macdonald.
Good evening and welcome to this ITV News special with all the latest developments in the wake of the attacks on New York and Washington. For the 6th consecutive day, teams of rescuers have continued their exhausting and painful search of the World Trade Center wreckage. And today, new pictures show Lower Manhattan as an apocalyptic wasteland. 1 million tons of twisted metal and masonry. It's estimated that 15 million square feet of office space was destroyed. With every passing hour now, hope of finding people alive is fading. 5,097 are listed as missing. Mark Austin reports from the scenes of devastation in New York.
3 square miles of New York reduced to 1 million tons of rubble. It is from the air the terrorists did their damage to this city, and it is from the air you can see most clearly the result of their extraordinary attack. And in this city of despair today, the search continued for the thousands still buried, people still officially listed as missing, but who now surely must be dead. Today we managed to gain access to the very center of what they call here Ground Zero, to within yards of what was once the World Trade Center. Only when you get this close can you fully appreciate the extent of the devastation here. The twin towers of one of the most famous buildings in one of the most sophisticated cities in the world now resembles something akin to a Roman ruin. It stands as a grotesque monument to the day the terrorists struck at the very heart of America. We're inside the security cordon, and this really is as close as you can get. And what you can see here is that the rescue teams and salvage operations are really only scratching the surface. It will take weeks, even months, to clear this smouldering mountain of twisted metal and debris. And amid the debris, the rescue teams and their dogs still work. But it's hard to believe anyone could still be alive in this. Then, suddenly, the call goes up for quiet. A faint tapping noise has been heard.
Take the hose! Shut up!
Soon everyone is silent, watching, waiting, hoping. Then a call for more equipment.
Light!
Another big light!
For the next few minutes they listen and they look.
We need a lot of quiet. You can't have the background noise. You got to back up, except for the team working here. So please, everybody else, just back up. Because there's too much background noise and they're listening.
These are men hoping against hope that even just one can be pulled out alive. But on this occasion, as on so many others in the past few days, there is nothing. No more tapping, no sign of life. The work resumes once more. Today we met one group of firefighters heading home for rest, exhausted and pained by the strain of it all. You can see it in their faces and hear it in their voices.
It's like torture. It's like torture. Can't find nobody.
What's the work been like? Hard?
It's not fun, that's for sure.
It hasn't been that good at all. It's been tough. Everybody's working hard, doing what they can. See what we can do to help the families out. We got to pull some brothers out. They're in there, a lot of people.
Do you think there's any chance now?
Yeah, I always think there's a chance.
I think there's still a chance?
Yeah.
What gives you that hope?
What else we got to go by? Just the way it is. I think it's a chance.
And you're going to carry on day after day until you find someone?
Well, we're going to do our job, and our job is to get our boys out.
And can you just sum up for people who have no idea what it's like, what it is really like?
It's a bad dream. That's all I can say. It's a bad dream.
All day and all night the operation goes on here. Last night a fire truck buried when the towers collapsed was finally lifted from the scene. For New York's firefighters this was a desperate image. 7 out of 8 of the men who worked from this truck were killed. So far in all only scores of bodies have been recovered. Thousands more are in there somewhere. Today we spoke to the police chaplain in charge of the temporary morgue here.
It's a scene out of hell. I mean, it's just, you can't believe the carnage is down there, and I mean, we're just bringing in parts of bodies, and it's, I mean, it's something that you can't, words can't describe adequately what they're doing, but the impact is an emotional impact. It's taking its toll on everybody. But it's something we have to do. It's something, you know, for the families to stay in there and to bring their loved ones out.
It's a scene that says war, and America is now preparing for one. What once stood here symbolized all that was strong about the country. They will, of course, rebuild, but what will never be put together again is the way America feels about itself, the sense of security, of invincibility this nation once had. Mark Austin, ITN, New York.
Tony Blair put Britain foursquare behind America today. In one of his strongest statements yet on tracking down those responsible for Tuesday's attacks, he said, "We are at war with terrorism." It followed an ominous warning from President Bush, urging Americans to be patient because the conflict will not be short. Here's our diplomatic editor, Robert Moore.
Late this afternoon, the Prime Minister emerged from Downing Street to echo President Bush's view that this was a war, and that Britain, like the United States, would now fight terrorism with all available resources. From the language and the tone, it was clear that direct British military involvement is now an increasing possibility.
Are we at war with the people that have committed this terrible atrocity? Absolutely. And we have to assemble the evidence, present it, and then pursue those responsible. And this is a time at the moment for a cool head and a steady nerve, but an absolute and fixed determination that the people responsible for this terrorist act that has killed probably hundreds of British people, as well as many thousands of Americans, are brought to justice.
Are you prepared for a war that may lead to British military casualties and one that may last for years?
We have to take action against the whole machinery of mass terrorism. And that is something for the whole international community to come behind. How it's financed, the groups operating this, the way that they operate, in order that we dismantle this machinery of terror.
Across the Atlantic, President Bush returned to the White House a short time ago, after a weekend at Camp David that amounted to a council of war. The president spoke not only of retaliatory strikes, but of a crusade that was just beginning.
We will rid the world of the evildoers. We will call together freedom-loving people to fight terrorism. It is time for us to win the first war of the 21st century decisively, so that our children and our grandchildren can live peacefully. That my administration is determined to find, to get them running, and to hunt them down, those who did this to America. The American people are used to a conflict where there was a beachhead or a desert to cross or known military targets. That may occur. But right now we're facing people who hit and run. They hide in caves. We'll get them out.
The cruise missile strikes on bin Laden's network were tried 3 years ago after the bombings of US embassies in Africa, and they failed. The question of how to destroy bin Laden and his terrorist cells has left the US military scrambling for a military plan. But the Americans are making clear they will take on not just individuals, but also the regimes in Afghanistan and elsewhere who have harbored and supported these Islamic militants. There is no sign of a huge mobilization of the US military similar to that witnessed before the Gulf War. This time it is more likely to involve air power and highly mobile special forces operating deep inside Afghanistan. Britain already has naval forces heading towards the Middle East on exercise. But it's not known if they might be diverted to be closer to landlocked Afghanistan, and whether SAS units will also be deployed to help in the hunt for bin Laden. With the bitter experience of Northern Ireland, Downing Street, like the White House, acknowledges any war against terrorism will last not weeks or months, but very possibly years. What is less clear is whether British forces will be deployed on the front line in Afghanistan or elsewhere. Robert Moore, ITN, Downing Street.
Let's go live now to our political editor, John Sargent, in Downing Street. John, precisely what does the Prime Minister mean when he says Britain is at war?
Well, it's not a formal declaration of war, such as happened in 1939 when Britain declared war on Germany. But what the Prime Minister is signalling very clearly today in an interview with American television is that military action by Britain will take place. When the conflict comes, he says, we will be there in support of the Americans. So it's not an if, it's a when. Military action is now being promised by Britain.
Mr. Blair wants to be in a position to support the United States. He's said that quite explicitly. How much influence does he have?
Well, he has an enormous amount of influence in this sense, is that if the Americans got into a dispute with the British behind the scenes, and that came out, and people felt the alliance was split, that could have a very damaging effect on the whole enterprise. Now, Mr. Blair knows that, Mr. Bush knows that, everyone involved in the negotiations knows that. When he was asked about it today, Mr. Blair was surprisingly confident about the level of support. He thought there would be support right across Europe, of course, but also right across the world.
John Sargent, thank you. People from some 40 nationalities were killed when the World Trade Center collapsed, and in countries across the world today, there were services to remember those who died. The Duke and Duchess of York attended the American Church in London. There were services in Balmoral, Edinburgh, Liverpool and Norwich. And this evening, people gathered for prayers in Westminster Abbey. Nicholas Owen reports.
Patiently, they had stood and queued. Now the crowd moved forward on their way into Westminster Abbey. Even here, though, there had to be the precautions that remind us all of grim realities. The rock star Mick Jagger arrived with one of his children to hear his estranged wife, the American actress Jerry Hall, address the congregation.
When Britain was being blitzed, we stood by you. When we are being terrorized, you stood by us. May we always stand together.
The Abbey was full for this unusual occasion. Many nationalities and various religions come together for a vigil of prayer and reflection on the American tragedy. And this was the American church in London today. Perhaps nowhere was the sense of loss suffered on both sides of the Atlantic more poignant than here. Friends, colleagues and members of the royal family joined by a common purpose to find hope out of despair.
God has been in the beautiful spirits of the British people as they have overwhelmed us with kindness and compassion and offers of help in these days.
At Balmoral, the Queen and Prince Philip drove to a private service to commemorate those who had died, a theme repeated in churches everywhere. In Liverpool, at the Anglican Cathedral, there were prayers for the dead and their families and those who have struggled so hard to try to find survivors. In Norwich, a special service for world peace on a day when so much of the talk and the fear is of war. In Bristol, a service in Clevedon was led by Father David Smith, whose cousin is among the missing. Father Smith said that as they seek retribution, governments should ensure their response is measured.
Any action we take has got to be very carefully considered so that the guilty are punished, but the innocent are not killed as well.
And one of those who must confront the crisis and make difficult decisions, Tony Blair, with his wife and two of their children, joined a service at London's Westminster Cathedral tonight. They and thousands across the country offering their Sunday prayers 5 days after the unprecedented horrors in the United States. Nicholas Owen, ITN.
It's now thought that as many as 300 Britons are missing, feared dead in New York. But it's also becoming clear that hundreds of others did manage to get out before the World Trade Center complex collapsed. For them, the days since the fateful events of Tuesday have been a time of great anguish. Here's Andrea Catherwood.
Opposite the smouldering remains of the World Trade Center, a shrine to the missing. This was the landing place for thousands of workers who'd escaped the burning towers and boarded ferries across the Hudson River to safety. Among them, British survivor Neil Richardson, a former policeman from Hereford. He evacuated his office when the first plane struck.
Looking up from the street level, we were almost immediately below. As terrible as it seemed, we felt fairly safe that what had happened, and we were looking up at this massive gaping hole with smoke and flames billowing out. And then it seemed like within about 20 seconds, the whole area just rocked with this massive, this sound, this huge explosion, and then these flames and smoke just sort of enveloped the whole top of what seemed like both buildings as this second plane had struck. And of course, the whole time I was looking up, seeing these poor souls jumping out, obviously still alive, many of them, and clearly faced with what they believe was either a slow, painful death or a quick exit. It was absolutely horrific and something I'd never, ever want to see again.
Neil's wife, Ingrid, was watching the attack on television.
As I was looking at the news, the second plane hit, and at that moment I thought Neil was gone. I really thought I had lost him, and I collapsed, and it was pretty bad. So I would say for a good 2 hours I didn't hear from Neil.
Today is their wedding anniversary. They're grateful to be together as a family, painfully aware of what others have lost. Survivors from the World Trade Center now say that crucial decision to leave the buildings wasn't as simple as you might think. In the confusion, many people had no idea what had caused the explosions they heard and felt. They didn't know if it was safer to stay in their offices or move to the streets. And even those who realized what had happened never imagined those mighty towers would collapse. For Steve Blackburn, that decision came after a call from his hometown of Nottingham.
I got a phone call from my sister-in-law in England who told me that planes were hitting into the World Trade Center, and I could look up out of the windows and see the towers burning.
Minutes later, he'd left his office for the street beneath the North Tower.
And then I felt and heard again a great roar and rumble, and I thought another plane had come in. It was in fact the first tower going down, and we took shelter, and the clouds, we could see them rushing towards us, and everybody turned and ran east, but we're overtaken by all the clouds, and we couldn't see, and couldn't breathe, and I couldn't see any. I don't know what road I was on. I couldn't see any buildings to go into. I just kept going and going until I came to some clearer air.
The British national anthem rang out across